Well, I'll tell you what, there's really not much in life that's scarier than a cancer diagnosis.
And one option for patients to take control of their treatment are clinical trials. They're on the cutting edge of research at Nebraska Cancer Specialists.
Yeah, here to explain more, Dr. Ralph Hauke. Good to see you, doctor. Thanks for stopping in this morning. When I think of clinical trials, I think hope, right? But what are clinical trials? Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Well, clinical trials are really research studies that are designed to try and see if they can improve on some outcome. They can actually be for different things. So we think generally clinical trials involving drugs that help prolong people's lives or cure diseases, but they can also be of instruments, devices. It can be even interventions that are more for like quality of life, things like that. But certainly in oncology and cancer, because we're dealing with life-threatening diseases, the vast majority are looking at drugs and how we can improve the outcome of people's lives with drugs.
What are the benefits for a patient of taking part in a clinical trial?
Well, there can be a few. I think traditionally people will say a clinical trial gives me access to a drug and I'm going to have a benefit from it. And I really think people need to realize that a clinical trial isn't a guarantee that you're going to have a benefit. There's different types of clinical trials, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but there certainly can be improvements. For instance, people can, it's an altruistic endeavor. In other words, you're going through a bad experience, and by participating in a trial, whether or not you derive a direct benefit from it, you are helping other people around you. You're helping people that are coming behind you with that disease in particular and so forth. There's also the other, which is really relatively known, is because you have more people coming into you have research coordinators and so forth that are part of your treatment team in addition to the regular clinical team. Actually, people tend to do better simply from they get more tapped into more with different people at the care level. So they actually do better from
lots of support.
Support, right?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, the ultimate goal, you hope that these clinical trials help the patient, right? But in long term, you really hope you can develop new treatments through this. That's the main goal, isn't it?
Correct, right.
And we're also looking now at some of the different types of clinical trials. Can you tell us a little bit about
the
information people have on
the
their
schema that you're looking there, it tells you the types of clinical trials. Clinical trials, for instance, drugs, they take years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. But when we are getting, for instance, in the case of a drug that you're going to start out, you'll see on the left-hand side, phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials are really drug trials that are relatively small. They're looking at the safety of the drug. They're testing a lot of blood testing to sample how does the body metabolize the drugs and so forth. And once they have what's a proper dose of the drug and the safety profile, then they move on to phase 2 trials. And phase 2 trials are really where they're looking at what's the potential benefit to a specific disease. They sometimes will have phase 2 trials that may be combined with other drugs just to simply see if adding a drug to another one does have some improvements. But then once they say, hey, this drug does seem to have some activity in the disease, then they move up to the big ones where the phase 3 trials, and there you can have hundreds to thousands of people in those trials. The phase 3 trials are really the ones that are looking at, for instance, does this intervention have a survival benefit with a particular drug and things like that. Phase 3 drugs are what most of the time we call the registration trials, which are the ones that the FDA, the company has to sit down with the FDA, go through it and say, okay, if we meet the endpoints on this trial, you're going to give us approval for this particular one. And then there's also some what are called phase 4 trials. Phase 4 trials are what we call post-marketing trials. So those are studies that are done a lot of times. For instance, as an example, the FDA may say, well, okay, you met your approval, but we're going to now, we still want some extra data. So they'll have them, for instance, do a registry to look at, collect patients who are treated with that drug to see if there's maybe other side effects that didn't show up, or they want to study things a little bit more. And then post-marketing also can be, for instance, when they're doing studies with the drug, not necessarily for new indication, but looking at other aspects of the drug. So
as you look at those phases, I imagine some people, maybe more so in phase 1, but probably all the phases, some of the patients may feel like, for lack of a better word, a guinea pig. What would you say to them at that point?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on where you're at. And yes, when you get to a phase 1 trial, usually that's really the people that have essentially exhausted most of the options that are available for them. And to some extent, when you're doing a first in-person study, in other words, a drug that's the first time you're doing it in person, yes, you to some extent, if you want to call it a guinea pig, not really a guinea pig, because these studies are all done with safety as their top objective. But you are sort of saying, I'm letting my body to see if this drug helps in any way.
That's where the hope aspect comes in into play.
Right, and really those folks that are in phase 1 trials are really, as I said, people who have essentially no other options available for them in the standard of care. So
we've really just scratched the surface just a little bit today. We don't have much time, but if people are intrigued and say, I want to know what clinical trials that you're involved in, me or someone that I love might be interested in taking part of these.
Sure.
What's the first step for that?
Well, so you can call our office. The numbers would be up there to call and talk to our research folks. They can look at the list. There are websites, clinicaltrials.gov, that you can look at and see. You can even look in Nebraska. Our office, we have locations, and we are involved with enough systems that we probably have the broadest group of availability of trials in the region in our office, and we can have patients go to different offices to access those clinical trials.
Yeah. But beyond those clinical trials, we just want people out there to know that you have a skin cancer screening coming up. You want to tell us about that real quick?
Yes, in May we have our second annual skin cancer screening, and we have 4 dermatology offices that will be there to help out. They're volunteering their time, and they will be looking at examining folks. And last year was our first one, and we actually had quite a few people that had melanomas and other skin cancers discovered.
So you
we detected them early, and that's the key, is to take care of them early on.
Should you get checked out once a year for skin cancer, those screenings, about once a year?
Yep, certainly when you go to your primary doctor, for sure. This is an opportunity to have a dermatologist actually evaluate.
Yeah, good time. Nebraska Cancer Specialists, nebraskacancer.com is the website. Dr. Hauke, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well, there's something new planned for Talk Like Shakespeare.